"Come and see," Philip said to Nathanael. "Go back and listen," Eli said to Samuel. "Come and see, and go back and listen." Samuel heard a voice calling, and he thought it was his teacher Eli, which was a logical conclusion. He was the only other person around. Samuel was a boy born of the deep prayer and commitment of his mother Hannah, and so in a sense he was already attuned to the voice of God because she had brought him up in prayer and devotion. Yet here, while he was still very young, God speaks to him and with a message that he doesn't really understand. And it turns out it's a message not for him, but for Eli and for Eli's family. But Eli confirms for Samuel that he has heard God speaking. And he tells him, "Go back and listen." And Samuel grew and was known to be a trustworthy prophet of the Lord. We know much less about Philip and Nathanael. In fact, Nathanael only appears in this account of the Gospel of John, and he's not in any of the other lists of the disciples. So all we know about him is in this rather strange conversation he has with Jesus. The conversation seems to be missing a few lines. But whatever goes on in the conversation, Nathanael is invited to come and see. And it turns out, and it is Jesus who sees him, sees who he is as a person and who he might be, and then in turn, Nathanael sees who Jesus is, the Son of God. It's as if Jesus' seeing of Nathanael in a deep way allows Nathanael in turn to see who Jesus is. In your life, who is it who invites you to come and see, or who tells you to go back and listen? Who are the people in your life who have guided you as you've waited or longed for something? It might be a teacher or a parent or a friend, an aunt or uncle or a godparent. Those times when you haven't been able to see what is going on around you, or you couldn't see what was really right in front of you, who has helped you find your way? Who's helped you discover a skill or acknowledge a desire that you held? Who's helped you have some insight into yourself? And who has helped you to see Jesus for who he really is? Those people are your Elis and your Philips. And our Elis and our Philips might not just help us understand ourselves, but they might help us understand the world around us as well. There's been much going on in our world in these last weeks that have made us pause and think, and we need help understanding them. And sometimes it might not be a person who helps us, it might be an article we read or some commentary or a movie. This last week we watched a wonderful French movie that some of you might have seen a few years ago called Of Gods and Men. It was directed in 2010 by French director Xavier Beauvoir. I know that the Interfaith Council in Auckland showed it a few years ago, so some of you may have seen it at their showing. The movie is the story of French Cistercian monks who lived in Algeria in 1996. Their monastery had been established there for generations, and they have lived there to serve the local village, Tiberine, offering a medical clinic and support generally to the village. There is no sense that they are there to convert the locals to Christianity. They are there simply to serve. And during the Algerian Civil War, which had been going on since 1991, they become increasingly under threat. Other foreigners near them have been murdered, and they debate whether to leave and go back to France or whether to stay. The movie has very little dialogue in it, which reflects the prayerful silence of much of the monks' day. And they conclude that they need to go back and listen some more. And they go back and they listen, and they go back and they listen. And eventually, they decide to stay, knowing that they will very likely be killed. And indeed, 6 out of the 8 are. In a letter left behind, the abbot, Christian, says, "If it should happen one day, and it could be today, that I become a victim of the terrorism which now seems ready to encompass all the foreigners in Algeria. I would like my community, my church and my family to remember that my life was given to God and to this country, and to accept that the one master of all life was not a stranger to this kind of brutal departure. I would like them to pray for me. How worthy would I be found of such an offering? I would like them to be able to associate this death with so many other equally violent ones that have been allowed to fall into the indifference of anonymity. My life has no more value than any other, nor any less value. In any case, it is not the innocence of childhood. I have lived long enough to know that I share in the evil which seems, alas, to prevail in the world, and even in that which would strike me blindly. I should like, when the time comes, to have a space of lucidity which would enable me to beg forgiveness of God and of my fellow human beings, and at the same time to forgive with all my heart the one who would strike me down. Abbot Christian invites those who would read his letter after his death to come and see and to go back and listen again, not to jump to conclusions or to rush to judgment. This week, the outpouring of commentary and opinion has continued in the wake of the killings in Paris. There's been less commentary on the other parts of the world, like the 2,000 who died in Nigeria. Just as he commented in his letter, the deaths of many have been allowed to fall into the indifference of anonymity. We're so easily saturated and numb to the reality of all the stories that come at us from the media each week. We get numb to those tragedies. And in a sense, that's okay because we can't possibly take it all in. But we can do something in our community, in our place. Come and see, Philip said to Nathaniel. Go back and listen, Eli said to Samuel. Aotearoa, New Zealand is a multi-faith land now, just like it's a multicultural one. And we need to see and to listen to our brothers and sisters of other faiths, I think more now than ever. We know that the way to peace can only be through dialogue and mutual concern, simply getting to know each other. And we don't have to deal with the hostilities of many places in the world. We do not have the wall of separation like in Israel-Palestine. We don't feel under threat. And yet these events across the world heighten our awareness of those who live alongside us and who follow different customs of worship, and yet they're not so different from our own. So this year I want us as a faith community and as individuals to seek ways that we can intentionally be in conversation with our brothers and sisters of other faiths. I know this has been part of a tradition from long ago at St Matthew's, and I want us to revive that spirit and to expand it. Jocelyn Armstrong is a member of the Auckland Interfaith Council, and she'll be able to guide us. But I'm also really interested in our own person-to-person contact. I wonder, how many of you have a work colleague or a neighbour or a friend or a family member who is Muslim? Put up your hand if you do. A good sprinkling. What about someone who is Jewish? About the same. What about someone who is Buddhist? Thank you. So that is where we start our conversations, with the people we know, with our neighbours, with our colleagues, with our family members, or a friend of a friend. We start in conversation. We share food. We listen. And we're intentional, making an effort to have new and fresh conversations, and let's see where they might lead. And then these brothers and sisters of other faiths, our friends, colleagues, our neighbours, They can be our Elis and our Philips as they lead us to recognise God in a new and different way in each other. I'm imagining that we're going to organise more of an official dialogue with leaders of the different faith communities, but it's at the person-to-person contact that I think we can really learn and make a difference. Stephen and I this week did a bit of a search online to look at courses in continuing education, and we've signed up for an Understanding Islam course at continuing education at Auckland University. It's on 4 evenings in March, and I'm hoping that one or two of you might like to join us in that course. It's just an introduction to the different aspects of Islam, because I'm finding that I'm pretty lacking in knowledge, and so I'm taking that step to educate myself. "Come and see," Philip said to Nathanael. "Go back and listen," Eli said to Samuel. At the time that Samuel was a boy, we are told that the word of the Lord was rare and visions were not widespread. The people were waiting to hear from God, and Samuel was the first prophet in a very long time. The people in Jesus' time were waiting as well. They were waiting for God. They were waiting and longing for hope, for peace, for justice, waiting to be in a deeper relationship with God. "Come and see," Philip said. "Go back and listen," Eli said. The psalmist says in Psalm 139, "Lord, you have searched me and known me because you knit me together in my mother's womb." God knows us from the beginning and in our hearts, and at the same time, God reaches from our hearts to the rest of the world, because the psalmist says, "Even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as day, for darkness is as light to you." God calls us to see and to hear God within our lives, and then we can see and hear with God the rest of the world. In many countries, the children of Yahweh and Allah and Jesus are born into a world where they cannot come into relationship together, just like apartheid in South Africa or the way segregation used to be in the United States. But we can sit down together and meet and listen and see. God calls us into relationship with each other. God invites us to come and see and listen. God invites us to be loved and to be part of God's reconciling love for the world.